Greetings and welcome to this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. My name is Joe Rubenstein and it is Wednesday, March 21st. Happy spring. And if that sounded somewhat lacking in sincerity, it's because a major snowstorm is hitting New York City as we speak. But nevertheless, just a week and a day from real baseball games that actually count. And we'll see Severino pitching opening day at the Rogers Center in Toronto. And manager Aaron Boone confirmed yesterday that second baseman Tyler Wade, who's had a truly eye-opening spring, will be on the 25-man roster. So that's great news for him and for all Yankee fans. You can follow us on Twitter at Bombers Podcast is the handle. You can like us on Facebook as well, subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher, and please do. We've got some fantastic episodes coming up you won't want to miss. And as always, you can send your comments and questions to joe@bronxbomberspodcast.com or give us a call at 646-854-4959. We would love to hear from you. And in this episode 9, as promised, we roll out our official 2018 Major League season preview. Today, we cover the National League, and next week, the Americans. And this isn't some quick hit drive-by type of deal. We, as usual, went all out to give you all the information you're going to need for what should be a fantastic year. Settle in for part 1 of the official Bronx Bombers 2018 Major League season preview. Back in a moment.
Bronx Bombers Trivia. Which of these 4 Yankees hit the first home run at the current Yankee Stadium? Was it A, Alex Rodriguez, B, Derek Jeter, C, Jorge Posada, or D, Hideki Matsui? The answer coming up a little bit later in the podcast.
And now here's Joe with this week's main thing.
Well, spring is here, my friends, sort of. And with it comes a brand new baseball season, which means previews, projections, predictions galore. The pros in Vegas have had their say, and now it's time for a little prognostication from yours truly as we take a hard look at all 30 Major League teams and draw some conclusions about where they might be headed in 2018. And so today, we are all about the National League. We'll go division by division, and I'll give you my picks for win totals, some of which won't be that surprising, but there are a couple where I take a pretty long stroll out on a limb with my picks. But hey, no guts, no glory, right? And since we have so much to cover today, I want to get right to it. And we begin with the National League West, and for my money, the toughest division in baseball. The NL West produced 3 playoff teams last year, if you count the second wild card as a playoff team, which I do. The Dodgers, the Rockies, and the Diamondbacks. And in 4 other divisions last season, the Diamondbacks would have ended up in first place. And the NL West could indeed produce 3 playoff teams again this year. It's not what I think will happen, as I'll explain later. But if they do, one of those playoff teams will definitely not be the San Diego Padres, my pick for last place. Let's face it, the Pods have not been blessed with a whole lot of success in their 48-year history, and they're coming off a real stinker of a season going 20 games under 500, and they haven't managed to put together a winning season since 2010. Now, they do have one of the best farm systems in baseball, and they should net some high draft picks out of what will be another bad season, despite the Eric Hosmer signing, which I like Hosmer. He's a good player, but not the kind of guy that's going to drag them into the promised land all by himself. And 8 years and $144 million, that's a lot of years and a lot of dough, and the Padres could live to regret that down the road. Although that was actually an anomaly in 2018. Most free agents, especially Scott Boras clients, either got way less than they thought they would or remain unsigned. So the Padres in December were on the other end of a Yankee salary dump. We unloaded Chase Headley and Brian Mitchell for more or less nothing, just to get rid of those contracts. And besides Hosmer, the Padres re-signed all-star closer Brad Hand, and they've still got Will Myers at first base, 30 home runs last year, and they've got a handful of competent players like Headley and Freddie Galvis, good defensive shortstop they got via trade from the Phillies, which I actually thought was a bad move for the Padres since Galvis only has 1 year left of team control, and the prospect they gave up was actually a pretty good young pitcher. But a handful of competent players, 2 all-star caliber players in Hosmer and Brad Hand, and a bunch of prospects they picked up in some of the other deals they made, including one where they shipped ex-Yankee Yernervis Solarte to the Blue Jays. San Diego has a weak starting rotation, but again, the good news is the farm system has a number of first-class arms, a couple at the AAA level, and may be ready for a promotion. So bottom line, the Padres are a work in progress. I've got them winning 69 games. That's the under. Vegas had them at 69.5. But it's not impossible that in 2 to 3 years, the Padres contend once again, but they really need to do it sooner rather than later. You don't want to waste guys like Hosmer and Brad Hand in their prime years. Moving on to my 4th place finisher in the NL West, the Colorado Rockies, who re-signed outfielder Carlos Gonzalez last week. 1 year, $8 million contract. But Cargo's not the same player that he once was. And on the pitching side, the Rockies lost all-star reliever Greg Holland, currently still a free agent, although I read recently that the Braves are giving him a hard look. And the Rockies also lost reliever Pat Neshek to the Phillies. Now, the Rockies did replace Holland and Neshek with Brian Shaw and Wade Davis, who may be just as good. And they also re-signed reliever Jake McGee the same day they signed Shaw. And McGee had a nice bounce-back season last year. So Colorado, at least on paper, has one of the better bullpens in baseball. But like the Padres, they have a young starting rotation who pitched well last year. I mean, John Gray was the best of them. And you might say, well, Joe, he had a 3.67 ERA. What's so great about that? Well, look, any starter that pitches in Coors Field half the time and keeps his ERA under 4 has my respect. And that young staff, that's actually what got them to that wild card game. But it's hard to know what to expect in 2018, although certainly the bullpen could save them in more than a few games. Now, they signed catcher Chris Iannetta to replace the departed Jonathan Lucroy, who's now on the A's, but they really needed to add more offense than that, and they didn't. And the fact is, the Giants have improved enormously this offseason, as we'll discuss, and the Diamondbacks have to a lesser extent as well. So I've got the Rockies at 79 wins, so that's an underpick as well. Vegas has them at 82, but I think they're one of those teams that's similar to Texas and Seattle in the American League, kind of stuck in the middle, not contending but not rebuilding, which is kind of a tough situation for fans of those teams. I mean, the Rockies have 3 heavy hitters in that lineup, in third baseman Nolan Arenado, center fielder Charlie Blackmon, and second baseman DJ LeMahieu. Those are 3 guys that make pitchers stand up and take notice. So it's a good lineup, but in the NL West, good isn't good enough. With the powerhouse Dodgers, the all-of-a-sudden star-studded Giants with a healthy Madison Bumgarner, who looked nasty against the Cubs last week, and another good team, my choice for third place, and this is one of my chancier picks. I'm picking not the Giants for third place, who went from being a playoff team in 2016 to winning 64 games last year. We'll get to them in a minute. But my choice for third place is the Arizona Diamondbacks. And look, the D-backs have real talent, and they could definitely make me look like a total jackass on this pick, but I've got Arizona just a smidge better than Colorado at 84 wins, which would be 9 fewer than last year, and another under pick. Vegas had them at 85.5. Arizona lost a couple of real impact players. First of all, right fielder J.D. Martinez, a really good deadline acquisition for Arizona last year, maybe second only to Houston's pickup of Verlander, but J.D.'s now in Boston. And although, as I said last week, he was a much different hitter on the road last year, and he's a poor defensive outfielder, his production will be tough to replicate. And former All-Star closer Fernando Rodney is now a Twin, and that's a good pickup for Minnesota, although he's well past his prime at 40 years old. But the D-backs have a good guy to slide into that ninth-inning closer role, big right-hander Archie Bradley. And Arizona has one of the better rotations in the National League, with 2 guys who had breakout seasons last year, Robbie Ray and Zach Godley, and the other Zach Greinke, who was phenomenal last year, finishing 4th in the Cy Young voting behind Scherzer, Kershaw, and Strasburg. Greinke finished with 215 strikeouts and a 3.20 ERA in over 200 innings, and that's a good ERA anywhere these days, but in Chase Field, That's another hitter's ballpark. It's superb. But he's also had recurring groin problems that are flaring up now, and his availability for opening day may be in jeopardy as we speak. The D-backs picked up outfielder Jarrod Dyson last month, who was injured a lot of last season in Kansas City, and when he played, he wasn't great. Good base stealer and good defender, and only costing Arizona $7.5 million over 2 years, but again, he's been injured a lot and he's 33 years old. But the true replacement, they hope, for J.D. Martinez in the lineup came when they picked up Steven Souza from the Rays in that 3-team deal that brought Diamondback Brandon Drury to New York. Souza, who's had well-documented problems with alcohol and various off-the-field issues when he was younger, dropped out of baseball for a while and returned a changed man. And in fact, since his return, he's improved pretty much every year in every facet of the game, so good for him. Last season was excellent, .351 on-base percentage, 30 home runs for Tampa, and one of the best defensive outfielders in the game. So assuming Greinke can stay healthy, the D-backs have solid pitching and a big-time hitter in all-star first baseman Paul Goldschmidt, and certainly enough supporting pieces to challenge for the wild card, but certainly not enough talent to take the division from LA. And with the loss of Martinez, they have less offense than they had a year ago when they were swept in the NLDS by the Dodgers. But even so, they beat the Dodgers in the regular season series last year and had the second best ERA in the National League behind the Dodgers, so they're still a team to take very, very seriously, and it'll be very close, in my opinion, as far as who takes second place in the division. But as I said, I'm going to go out on a limb here and give it to our next team, the San Francisco Giants, by a hair. I have the Giants winning 85 games in 2018, which would indeed be a great leap forward, a 21-game improvement, and that's my first overpick of the day. Vegas has them at 81.5. But look, last year they rivaled the Mets as far as injuries. It was one guy after another in an endless parade to the DL. Bumgarner, Johnny Cueto, Buster Posey, Denard Span, who's now in Tampa. The two Brandons, Crawford and Belt, Hunter Pence, all their big guns took a beating last year. And so the reason for my optimism, all those guys are coming back healthy and look good so far this spring. And the Giants picked up some big-time players, trading for Pirates outfielder Andrew McCutchen. It'll be nice for him to be on a contender after suffering all those years in Pittsburgh, who are a total disaster. We'll get to them. And the Giants also traded for Rays third baseman Evan Longoria, sending shortstop Christian Arroyo and Denard Span in that deal. That's a major upgrade for the Giants. First of all, they were absolutely desperate for a third baseman. Their third baseman last season combined hit .229, worst in the majors. So they go from that to one of the very best in the game in Longoria, and also to have McCutchen out there in center field. First of all, he's a great defensive outfielder, and also look at the upgrade over Span. 28 home runs last year for McCutchen versus 12 for Span, 88 RBIs versus 43, .363 on-base percentage, 34 points higher than that of Denard Span, and the Giants also picked up outfielder Austin Jackson, who made maybe the best catch I've ever seen last season to rob Hanley Ramirez of a home run. If you haven't seen it, look for it on YouTube. Absolute highway robbery. He ran almost 100 feet and then flipped over the right center field wall into the Red Sox bullpen and managed to hold on. It was beautiful. So the Giants signed him, 2 years, $6 million, and they were pretty much as desperate to upgrade their outfield as they were with third base. Their outfield's combined average was .255 last year. So again, McCutchen and Austin Jackson were good moves, and for now, the Giants are vastly improved at third base and in the outfield. And like the Yankees and the Dodgers, and unlike the Red Sox, the Giants managed to pull off these moves without exceeding that luxury tax threshold. So look, after a dreadful year where literally everything went wrong, the Giants are back all of a sudden to being serious players, and assuming good health, they have one of the better infields in the majors with Longoria, second baseman Joe Panik, shortstop Brandon Crawford, first baseman Brandon Belt, and the great Buster Posey behind the plate. They've also got Bumgarner, Cueto, and Samardzija, a very good setup man in Watson, and a good closer in Mark Melancon. So the Giants are very much a part of the conversation in the National League, which you can't often say about a team that just lost 98 games. I mean, look, could I be overselling them? Sure. but I really think the Giants are going to make some noise in 2018. Just not as much as my first-place team in the NL West. No surprise, your defending National League champion Los Angeles Dodgers, one of the most successful franchises in baseball in recent years, who had a remarkable 2017, finishing with a Major League best 104 wins, second most in franchise history. They strolled through the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, only to lose a heartbreaker in 7 to the Astros, but LA remains exceptionally strong. They did make some minor changes in their roster. I mean, why make major changes, right? They won 104 games. Their biggest move was reacquiring Matt Kemp, and that was a salary dump, as we said earlier, to stay under that luxury tax threshold. The Dodgers also lost a couple of relievers, Tony Watson to the Giants, as we just said, Brandon Morrow, now a Cub. That was a good pickup for Chicago, by the way. But the Dodgers replaced those 2 guys with 2 decent pitchers, Scott Alexander of the Royals and Tom Kohler, so their bullpen should hold steady with the excellent Kenley Jansen to close out games. They've also got an absolutely deadly lineup, featuring back-to-back Rookie of the Year winners, shortstop Corey Seager and first baseman Cody Bellinger. They've got Justin Turner, who, after starting his career looking very ordinary for the Mets, turned himself into an absolute beast, hit .322 last year, OPS close to 1,000. The Dodgers are basically the same team that won 104 games last year. I mean, sure, there are some health questions with their starting 5. Kershaw usually spends some time on the DL every year. Rich Hill is 37 years of age, also on the DL a bunch last year. But I have the Dodgers winning 95 games this year. That's under Vegas. Vegas has them at 96.5. But 95 is going to be enough wins to take first place in the National League West. All right, moving on to the NL Central, my pick for last place is, now this was actually a close one, but I'll go with my gut and pick the Reds. I've got Cincinnati winning 73 games, just under Vegas at 73.5, which would be an improvement of 3 wins. The Reds, like the Dodgers, had a very quiet offseason. The Reds, unlike the Dodgers, are not a good baseball team. They do, however, have one of the best players in the game, first baseman Joey Votto, who had a ludicrous year last year. At the All-Star break, he was actually tied with Giancarlo Stanton with 26 home runs. He was in the top 10 in the National League in batting average, slugging, runs, homers, and RBIs, and he's an absolute on-base machine. His on-base percentage led the league at .454, and Joey Votto narrowly lost out to Giancarlo Stanton for National League MVP, lost only by 2 votes. And their second baseman ain't bad either, Scooter Gennett, former Brewer, who the Reds picked up off waivers a year ago, and that worked out pretty well. Scooter was Lou Gehrig for a day on June 6th. He hit 4 home runs, including a grand slam, and 10 RBIs against the Cardinals. And that's a very select club, that 4 home run club. Scooter, just the 17th player in Major League history to pull it off. There's been more perfect games than 4 home run games. So the Reds caught lightning in a bottle. Again, they picked this guy up off waivers, and he posts career highs with 27 home runs and 97 RBIs. Good defensive second baseman too, and he can play third and outfield as well. Now, were those numbers an outlier? Very possible. We have to wait and see. But the right side of the infield is pretty much where all the star power resides for the Reds. And they lost some guys this winter as well, notably third baseman Zach Cozart to the Angels. That's a big loss. He hit .300 last year with 24 home runs and 7 triples. Now, they did add some moderate talent to the bullpen. David Hernandez, kind of a journeyman, but decent career numbers, and he can step in as the primary setup man for closer Raisel Iglesias. And they signed Jared Hughes, who had a good season in Milwaukee last year, out of the pen. But the Brewers, who we'll get to, have gained serious ground. One of the most improved teams in the majors, in my opinion. And the Reds, other than the bullpen, are not. Now, the outfield is a major problem. The word was that the Reds were trying to move lightning fast but non-hitting center fielder Billy Hamilton this offseason, but it never happened. Hamilton is an absolute speed demon. He's probably the best base stealer in the game today, but he cannot freaking hit. And he doesn't walk much either. His career on-base percentage is .298. That's terrible. And he's their leadoff hitter. his lack of offense has really hurt the team and hindered Votto's ability to drive in runs. And then there's the starting rotation, which was as injury-plagued as any in the majors last year, other than maybe the Mets and the Giants. Right-hander Anthony DeSclafani missed the entire year with a sprained UCL. Now, apparently his injury did not require any surgery, and the word is he's healthy and ready to go, so the Reds are crossing their fingers on him. Homer Bailey, after tearing his UCL in 2015 and undergoing Tommy John surgery, had more surgery a year ago to remove bone spurs from his elbow, came back in June, and had an absolutely awful year, 6.43 ERA, career-ending numbers. So that's absolutely this team's Achilles heel, the starting pitching. And unfortunately for them, they're in one of the better divisions in baseball, with the Cubs, Cardinals, and Brewers all good. So I think Reds fans are in for another tough campaign in 2018, but fans of my next team need not elevate their hopes very highly either. My pick for fourth place in the NL Central, the Pittsburgh Pirates, I've got the Bucks winning just one more game than the Reds, so 74. They're coming off back-to-back losing seasons, and as we mentioned, lost a key piece in Andrew McCutchen, as well as probably their best pitcher, although he was kind of mediocre last year, Garrett Cole. Attendance is plummeting at PNC Park. I mean, you could hear a pin drop when the Yankees played there last year. The only noise you heard was transplanted Yankee fans. And this winter, the Pirates have done basically nothing but slash payroll, and Pirates fans are furious. And this has been building for years. The Pirates tend not to get great return on trades. And in fact, they may have been borderline fleeced by the Astros in that Garrett Cole deal. I mean, it raises alarm bells when you hear stuff like this from GM Neil Huntington. This is Huntington on one of the relievers they got in that deal, Michael Feliz. Quote, "His metrics and his indicators are better than his surface ERA." I didn't know there was a surface ERA. I thought there was just an ERA, but apparently there's a surface ERA and a shadow ERA. But back to Huntington. It reminds us of guys we've had a lot of success with here that have quality stuff, but the results are less than the indicators, and then eventually the indicators catch up to the actual, unquote. Yeah, we'll see. The actual is, this dude's ERA was almost 6 last year, and Joe Musgrove, big tall right-hander they got in that deal for Garrett Cole, has never had any sustained success in the bigs, although he looked pretty good last week against the Yankees. He struck out 5, but that was a very prospect-heavy lineup. And the Pirates also didn't really get much from McCutchen, right-handed reliever Kyle Crick. Ever heard of him? No, I didn't think so. And they got a prospect named Brian Reynolds, but that's it? Really? In exchange for a 5-time All-Star, former MVP, and Gold Glover? I mean, it's truly mind-boggling, and this is what has the Pirates fan base in an uproar. I mean, how do you trade really the team's 2 best players and get essentially nothing out of it? So there's petitions, there's threats of a boycott, although I'm not sure a boycott would be all that noticeable. The joint was like a morgue there in the couple of games I watched last year. But in any case, owner Bob Nutting is now public enemy number 1 for Pirates fans. Probably their best remaining starter is ex-Yankee Ivan Nova, who is sort of like Michael Pineda, frustrating as hell. They both have great stuff, but just incredibly inconsistent in pinstripes. Now, Nova had an okay year last year, but the rest of the Pirates' starting 5 is a patchwork of no-names and mediocrities. Actually, that's a little severe. Most of them are too young to label mediocre, but let's put it this way. They have a lot to prove, like everything to prove. But unlike the Reds, whose downfall will be their pitching, it's the lineup where the Pirates will suffer the most. Really one threat, and that's it. Left fielder Adam Duvall has some power, 31 home runs, 99 RBIs last year, but he's got pretty bad on-base numbers. Ex-Yankee Francisco Cervelli was awful last year, career low 249. Pirates were 3rd worst in the majors in runs scored last year, 4th worst in batting average, 2nd worst in slugging, so tough times in Steel City. It's a team seemingly without any identity or a sense of direction, as the other 3 teams in the division all have at least some reason to believe, and one of them, in my opinion, has a legitimate shot to win the whole enchilada. But let's start with my second surprise pick of the episode, my choice for 3rd place in the division, But no, it's not the Brewers, my friends. It is the St. Louis Cardinals. I know, winning's in their DNA, blah, blah, blah. second only to the Yankees in championships, blah, blah, blah. But I'm a big fan of Milwaukee's offseason, and I think the Cardinals group is getting stale. And let's be honest, this is a really boring team to watch, and they have been for some time now. I have serious questions about their pitching staff, especially the bullpen, which was horrendous last year. The Cardinals bullpen in 2017 was 43 for 60 in save situations, okay? Not good. Their closer, Luke Gregerson, was a fiasco with a mid-4 ERA, and they also lost two key members of their starting rotation, Lance Lynn, now in Minnesota, and Mike Leake. That was a trade actually that happened late last season with the Mariners and was basically a salary dump. And those two guys, Lynn and Leake, really helped keep the Cardinals in the playoff hunt last year. That was the first time in 10 years, by the way, that the Cardinals missed the playoffs 2 years in a row, finishing just 4 games over 500. So I really don't get all the preseason love for this team, not at all. I mean, the likeliest replacements for Lynn and Leake, that sounds like a corrupt Washington law firm, are Miles McCollus and 24-year-old Luke Weaver. Weaver pitched okay last year, but there are questions about his durability. So that's two major question marks to place alongside the much more proven Carlos Martinez, an all-star last year. And the other two guys that round out that rotation are Michael Wacha and 36-year-old Adam Wainwright, who's had recurring shoulder problems, and his walk rate was the highest of his career last year. So you can start to see why I think the Cardinals are headed for their third straight season of missing the playoffs. Now, the Cardinals are one of the teams that benefited from the dismantling of the Marlins. They traded for all-star Marcell Ozuna. Ozuna had a great year last year, single-season highs for batting average at .312, home runs with 37, and 124 RBIs. That's pretty incredible. And Derek Jeter's Marlins got a bunch of young pitchers, including Sandy Alcantara, who's looked very good, actually, in spring training for the Marlins. But with Ozuna, 2017 was the only year he's had that type of production, and the Cardinals have to hope it was not an outlier because they desperately need power in that lineup. They had zero pop last year, and they did more or less nothing to address the bullpen issues. And that, plus the questions with their rotation, is why I have them dropping to third place. So I've got the Cardinals at 79 wins, well under Vegas at 85.5. This will be a season in St. Louis, I believe, that will strongly resemble last season and could be a good deal worse. And from what I'm hearing, ticket sales are dropping accordingly. But not for the next team we look at. My pick for second place, the Milwaukee Brewers, my other bold / potentially stupid pick. Both Vegas and Fangraphs have Milwaukee in third. Fangraphs has them at only 78 wins. Not seeing it. Vegas at 84.5. That's more reasonable. But I'm going 88 wins, and I'm actually more confident in this pick than I am in my Giants pick. I love the Brewers offseason. It was bold, it was brash, and I'm sure, they'd rather play the underdog than the favorite anyway. But Fangraphs, those people are insane. I mean, how does Fangraphs give them 78 wins after they won 86 last year and added Christian Yelich and then signed the underrated Lorenzo Cain, 5 years, $80 million, the largest free agent signing in franchise history, by the way? That's a seriously upgraded outfield. So no, a drop-off of 8 wins? That doesn't make any sense. Sorry, Fangraphs. A tough break last year was their ace, Jimmy Nelson, had a shoulder tear. He tore it diving headfirst back to first base. Yet another example of why the DH should be in both leagues. But Nelson should be back at some point early this season. And look, their staff is still a work in progress. They signed a couple of young pitchers in December that each come with question marks. So they really need Nelson to return healthy and effective to prevent me from looking like a total jackass, which is all that's really important here, right? They also added lefty reliever and ex-Yankee Boone Logan in a one-year deal. He's a sidearm pitcher who's pretty tough on lefties. Lefties over the course of his career only hit .247 against him. An even better bullpen addition, in my opinion, was righty Matt Albers, coming off a great season in Washington. Maybe an outlier, but a 2-year, $5 million deal. That's not too much of a gamble, and the upside is there for sure. Now, like the Yankees, but even more so, the Brewers have too many outfielders, okay, including Ryan Braun, who had a not-so-great 2017, and who they're trying out at first base, but it's been a big challenge for him this spring training. He said he's not remotely comfortable there. But I wouldn't be surprised if Milwaukee makes a trade at some point of one of these guys for a starter if they're in the hunt in July, which they should be. I mean, they have a lineup that can stand with some of the very best lineups in the National League. But to sum it up, I'm giving Milwaukee 88 wins, but some of these health questions with their starting rotation push them back behind my first place team in the NL Central. No surprise, the Cubs of Chicago. Their big move this offseason was landing Yu Darvish, obviously, but they also added former Rocky Tyler Chatwood to their starting rotation, and that's a gamble. 2 Tommy Johns, and his numbers really aren't great overall, but the Cubs are attributing some of that to Coors Field. Chatwood in his career has a 6.07 ERA in Coors and a 2.57 ERA away, night and day. And strong additions to their bullpen for the Cubs. Brandon Morrow from the Dodgers, who can hit 98 on the radar gun and had a 2.06 ERA last year and over 10 strikeouts per 9, and the underrated Steve Cishek, who pitched 45 innings last year to a 2.01 ERA. So that's a nice upgrade in the arms department, and the lineup is, look, it's one of the best in baseball. I mean, they led the majors in runs scored after the All-Star break last year, and they're young, so there's still room for improvement. And everyone's talking about Chris Bryant slipping a little last year. I mean, he hit 10 fewer home runs, but he upped his on-base percentage by 26 points. So his OPS actually ended up higher than 2016. He's a great young player. Another potentially great young player, Kyle Schwarber, 30 home runs last year, but hit a dreadful 211 and struck out 150 times. Lost 20 pounds this offseason, and it looks like Joe Madden is going to use him as his starting left fielder. It hasn't been exactly smooth sailing out there for him, but, he's looked somewhat better there this spring, and they can also sub it out late in close games. So any guy that can hit 30 home runs in a supposedly down year should be given every chance. So this is a team that has been a powerhouse the last 3 years and an average of 97 wins. I guess any questions would revolve around whether or not some of the starters that looked to me to have a World Series hangover last year, especially John Lester, can get back to form. As I noted a couple of episodes ago, Lester's ERA ballooned from 2.44 in 2016 to 4.33 last year. But one good sign, he was good in the playoffs last year. And, we'll see what Darvish does. I mean, I have questions about the wisdom of that deal. Not so much because of his awful showing in the World Series, although that was disturbing, but his ERA has also gone steadily up the last few years, 2.83 to 3.06 to 3.41 to 3.86 last year. So for all of his talent, he's not Clayton Kershaw, okay? Not even close. He's a very good pitcher, just not great. And with the bullpen, I like Morrow and Cishek, but the rest of their pen isn't exactly lights out. And they had a serious problem walking guys last year, 5 walks per 9 last year in the second half, and they lost their all-star closer Wade Davis to the Rockies. Chicago's strength, though, is the same strength as the Brewers, their lineup. But the Cubs lineup is a bit better, with Bryant, Anthony Rizzo, Wilson Contreras all coming off outstanding years. And like Milwaukee, there are some questions about their pitching. A bunch of the guys I've mentioned for the Cubs have had health issues, most notably Brandon Morrow, but still their rotation is definitely better than Milwaukee's, with Darvish, Quintana, Hendricks, Lester, and Chatwood, and I have them pegged at 95 wins, same as the Dodgers, and that's an overpick, actually. Vegas has them at 94.5, and so there it is, your National League Central.
And now the answer to today's Bronx Bombers trivia question. Which Yankee hit the first home run at the current Yankee Stadium? The answer? C. Jorge Posada. And now, here's Joe.
All right, moving on to the National League East, the final division in our National League preview. And the Yankees face the NL East this year in interleague play, a division that had exactly one team last year with a winning record, which, by the way, that's certainly an advantage that we have over Cleveland and Houston, especially Houston. They have to play the Dodgers, Diamondbacks, and Giants. That's 3 good teams, whereas the NL East, beyond the Nationals, just not on the same level. And my choice for last place in the National League East is, no surprise whatsoever, the Miami Marlins. The Marlins are like a skeleton in the desert that's been picked clean by buzzards. And Derek Jeter just blew up the building, and now it's a bunch of prospects and Starlin Castro, But sometimes those teams can surprise you, and sometimes those teams can be fun to watch. It's like that Bob Dylan line, when you ain't got nothing, you got nothing to lose. And I enjoy watching a bunch of kids sort of sink or swim, trying to make a name for themselves in the bigs. There's kind of a drama in that. But I can't see Miami ending up anywhere but last place. I'll give them 66 wins, which is actually an over pick. Vegas has them at 64.5. I mean, in giving up those three players I just mentioned, they gave up 116 home runs, 370 RBIs, and 430 runs, well over 50% of their offensive output from last season. And what'd they get? Well, for the most part, prospects, and that was the point. I mean, to cut payroll and build up what had been one of the worst farm systems in baseball, and the results are forthcoming. You know, you can't, it's tough to judge these types of deals of veterans for prospects, like the trade for Sonny Gray last year, where we gave up 3 prospects. Honestly, I don't know who, quote unquote, won that trade, and we won't know for about 3 years until we see what those prospects become. And frankly, I'm not entirely sure why those Marlins fans, all 42 of them, or however many there are so mad at Jeter. As he pointed out at that ridiculous town hall, which is just like a group therapy session, it's not like they were winning with those players. I mean, Stanton hit 267 home runs in 8 years down there and never played for a winning team, not once. I mean, Marlins home games these past few years have had about as much spirit as your local DMV. So we'll essentially be looking at a scramble for jobs down there, and maybe some of those kids are going to surprise. I know they're giving ex-Yankee Garrett Cooper, who they picked up in the Stanton trade, a long look at first base. But the truth is they have no pitching, and that's coming off a season where they had a team ERA of 4.82, fifth worst in the majors. And the handful of veterans that are there, Castro, the catcher, what's his name, Real Muto, those guys might not even be there very long. I mean, I would assume Jeter is going to just go full bore on this rebuild and will deal those 2 guys for more prospects. Why wouldn't he? But you know what? The Marlins have actually played halfway decent this spring. Of course, they're not playing against exactly top-of-the-line guys yet, but I have a feeling when the rubber meets the road that the Marlins are going to be roadkill, which brings me to my 4th place team in the NL East, the interesting and possibly underrated Atlanta Braves, who, similar to the Marlins, they're looking to test their prospect depth this season, except not similar to the Marlins. Their farm system is phenomenal. In fact, it's the best in baseball, with top prospect Ronald Acuna, an outfielder who's been absolutely destroying minor league pitching for years and is now killing it in spring training. This kid, in 36 at-bats, is hitting .417, on base is .523, 3 home runs, 4 steals. He's the real deal, and yeah, I'm sure the Braves will send him down. Actually, I just read they did send him down today so they can game the system and steal that extra year of service time. But he'll be playing in the big leagues this year, I would say by the end of May, and he'll be a lot of fun to watch. And over the next few years, the Braves are going to be very much back in the conversation because Acuna isn't the only one. They've got a whole passel of Tier 1 prospects, both pitchers and position players, in their farm system. If even half of their top-tier pitching prospects pan out, the Braves are going to be in great shape. Now, they also have some veterans they picked up from the Dodgers from the Matt Kemp deal. So the Braves picked up veteran right-handers Scott Kazmir and Brandon McCarthy, both 34 years of age, but serviceable. But clearly their best veteran player is first baseman Freddie Freeman. He was hurt a lot last year, but still managed to hit 28 home runs and drive in 71. The Braves are like a high-end version of the Marlins, or maybe better put, the Braves are what the Marlins hope to be in about 2 years. Unlike a middle-of-the-road team like the Cardinals, I think the Braves will be one of the more entertaining teams to watch this year. I'm taking the over on Atlanta, barely. Vegas has them at 74.5. I'm saying 76. To be honest, I almost picked them for 3rd place, but they just don't have the pitching this next team does, and that team is the suddenly rejuvenated Philadelphia Phillies. Well, maybe that's a bit overstated. I think, I know they've made some great pickups, including Carlos Santana, who plays first base and also a mean guitar. 3 years, $60 million on that deal. And last week, Jake Arrieta, 3 years, $75 million. And I think they'll be vastly improved from last year, which wouldn't be hard. They only won 66 games. But I still think they're a year or two from contending. They've got a brand new manager who I like, Gabe Kapler. high energy guy, smart, and he brings a lot of that Dodger knowledge to Philly. He was director of player development in LA. And the Phillies' additions went beyond Santana and Arrieta. They went on a pretty fair-sized spending spree in December, picking up relief pitcher Pat Neshek, who's been around, 37 years of age, 2-year deal. He's got a submarine-style delivery that can be hard for right-handed hitters to pick up. And he had really good numbers last year in Philly and then in Colorado. And they signed another reliever to a 2-year deal, Tommy Hunter, who's also been around, injured a bit last year for the Rays, but not serious. And when he came back, he pitched really well, ending up with the best ERA of his career, 2.61. So those are two real nice additions to the pen. So fans down there in Philly might have more than just the Eagles to cheer about. Now, is this how recent world champions, the Cubs, the Astros, is this how they did it, acquiring free agents? No. But here's the thing. The free agent market this year has been historically slow, and players are getting much smaller deals than they would have gotten 5 years ago. So Philly's management felt that they were far enough along that they figured, hey, what the hell? Let's pick up some bargains here and see if we can make some noise, pull off a Cinderella. So we'll see if it pans out. It's not impossible. They won't make the Nationals sweat, but they could be on the fringes of the wild card race for sure. Don't forget, 35% of their schedule is against the Marlins, Braves, and Mets. And the Phillies have some decent position players. Their outfielders had a combined OPS of well over 800 last year. And Carlos Santana is a reliable hitter. He's a pro's pro with plenty of big game experience. Career on-base percentage of .365. That's excellent. And he can hit leadoff or bat cleanup wherever they need him. And right-handed starter Aaron Nola had a solid campaign last year and should make a nice 1-2 with Arrieta. So fans down there in cheesesteak country could see a pretty good team down there at Citizens Bank Park in short order. And I'm giving the Phillies 81 wins, well over Vegas, who has them at 75.5. And that 81 wins is just too shy of the 83 that I'm giving our second-place team in the National League East, your New York Mets. The Mets have pitching. Okay, the question, as always, is can the Mets pitchers stay healthy? I don't see lightning striking twice in 2 years here. It's hard for me to see that staff having the kind of injury-plagued season again 2 years in a row. And if Syndergaard is as good as he's looked so far this spring, 13 innings, 1.38 ERA, 18 strikeouts. And DeGrom, who struck out 4 in his start against Houston last week, if he holds form, that's a nasty 1-2 at the top of the rotation. Callaway has already said Syndergaard will start opening day a week from tomorrow against St. Louis. And if Harvey, who pitched pretty well yesterday, can regain some of what he lost the last couple of years, he and left-hander Jason Vargas, that's a nice 3-4. And then it looks like with Zach Wheeler's implosion last week against the Nationals, where he gave up 5 earned runs, 7 hits, 2 walks, Steven Matz seems to be gaining in that race for the last rotation spot, and Seth Lugo and Robert Gsellman, both potential starters should Matz falter, will start the season in the pen. The Mets made some nice offseason moves that added depth without crippling them financially. They signed Todd Frazier, Jay Bruce, and Adrian Gonzalez, all veterans with proven track records, although Gonzalez has been pretty awful this spring. Last time I checked, hitting just over 233 at-bats. But he'll get that starting first base job by default since Dominic Smith is sidelined with a right quad strain. And speaking of injuries, is Yoenis Cespedes the most injury-prone superstar in the history of injury-prone superstars, or what? I mean, this guy can't get out of bed without pulling a hamstring. And this spring, first it's his right shoulder, then it's his wrist. And I feel bad for Mets fans. Instead of watching this guy mash home runs, they're hearing about, x-rays and cortisone shots. It's freaking depressing. But some good news, outfielder Michael Conforto, who missed the second half last year with a back injury and then had elective surgery in September, Conforto appears to be on track for a return in May. So if Cespedes continues to have problems, Conforto coming back could definitely offset that. 27 home runs before he went down last year. And if Conforto can stay healthy, that would be a major weapon for the Mets. And that brings us to our 15th and final National League team, my pick, for the top spot in the National League East, the super talented yet super frustrating Washington Nationals, who are rapidly approaching Cleveland Indians status for inexplicable postseason flameouts. If I was a Nats fan, I would feel dread every time summer changed to autumn, because something always seems to go wrong at the worst possible time. But there's no question they have the best team, top to bottom, in this division, and have as good a shot as anyone, really, to take the National League pennant this year. Although, as I said earlier, I think in 2 to 3 years, they'll have at least 2 teams who can make them sweat. And I think those 2 teams are going to be the Braves and the Phillies. But the Nationals, who I have winning 96 games this year, are being undersold in Vegas. Vegas has the Nationals at 92.5. Fangraphs, whose predictive powers I hold in very low esteem. Remember, these are the geniuses who had the Yankees finishing last season 3 games over 500. Fangraphs has the Nationals at 90, and I have no idea why. All the Nationals' big guns are back. More than that, actually. They get Adam Eaton back after missing almost all of last season with a torn ACL. Eaton saw his first Grapefruit League action over the weekend against the Mets, and like the Yankees, the Nationals acquired some major bullpen help mid-season last year. Sean Doolittle and Ryan Madsen, who they picked up in a trade with Oakland, and Brandon Kintzler, who came from the Twins in July. And so this year, Washington will benefit from those 3 quality arms all season long. So why the so-called experts have them winning 7 fewer games this season is beyond my powers of comprehension. I'm just not seeing it. Not with Washington's pitching staff, led by reigning Cy Young winner Max Scherzer, and Bryce Harper now in his walk year, coming off another great season. But it's a great lineup. I mean, third baseman Anthony Rendon, Ryan Zimmerman at first, 36 home runs last year, and of course Daniel Murphy, like Justin Turner, another Met that got away. But again, this is a team that always looks like a powerhouse during the regular season. And indeed, it's a team that has done it all except win a single playoff series. And that goes back to their prior incarnation as the Montreal Expos. The Expos, who entered the majors in 1969, the year of my birth, never won a playoff series either. And again, with not only Harper, but Daniel Murphy set for free agency a year from now, and Rendon the year after that, there should be some desperation down there. I mean, I'm not saying they haven't wanted it, and I don't believe in curses. And with the playoffs, there's definitely a fair amount of luck that plays into these things, especially with such a small sample size like a 5-game NLDS. A lot can happen. But I hope for the sake of that fan base who, haven't they suffered enough with the Washington Capitals and the NHL doing the same playoff flame-out routine every single year? I mean, I hope the Nats, gel under new manager Dave Martinez and break that trend and at least make it to the NLCS this year. So there you have it, my analysis of all 15 National League teams. My biggest divergence from the pros were on the following teams. First and foremost, I think Vegas is way too high on St. Louis. I'm 6.5 under. I think they're too low on Philly. I'm 5.5 over. And to a lesser extent, I think Vegas is also too low on the Mets, the Giants, and Milwaukee. I'm 3.5 over on those 3 clubs. And if my win total predictions play out, the 3 division winners would be the same as last year, Dodgers, Cubs, and Nationals. And the National League wildcard game would be hosted by Milwaukee, who would play the Giants of San Francisco. And that'll do it for this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. Again, don't forget, subscribe via iTunes or Stitcher, follow us on Twitter @BombersPodcast, like us on Facebook as well, share it with all your peeps, and most of all, have faith in the Yankees. We'll see you again next week.